Pain heals. Chicks dig scars. Glory lasts forever.
Caitlin Clark's career devastated, derailed by strength training and bulking up like the Hulk. Let's talk about it. Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate all your support. Hope you're having a fantastic day. And of course, shout out to the 19. So hopefully there are a lot of you that interested in this because this is kind of going to get into the weeds a little bit. But as someone who has dealt with strength training for athletic performance, all the usuals, of course, to get people that want to lose weight and this and that, but athletic performance who has trained athletes, mostly soccer players, basketball players as well. For many, many years, I have been, and I'm just giving you this is kind of boring, but just to give you, at least you have an idea of where I'm coming from. I'm just not spouting off nonsense to take a different point of view, more certifications and so forth in strength training and performance training and mental training and all that, then I probably let more expire than most people even know exist. One of the big organizations in this field will be the IYCA, which I've done. I've written books and programs and train athletes all over the country because I do it online as well. And so, I've been published in magazines like Ironman magazine, back when it was a 12 issue a year actual magazine, which, those things are kind of dying. It's been around since 1936. So I have a little bit of knowledge in this. So I want to talk about all the nonsense that I've seen spout out there about, oh, Caitlin Clark's getting injured because she was strength training. Oh, Caitlin Clark's slow and getting injured because she was bulking up. And so you get a lot of nonsense like this. And I like Michael. Okay, just to be clear, like Michael and I get along. If you look over to the right, we can see we both follow each other. I've exchanged DMs with Michael, but on this issue, we are very, very much apart. And I've given him a hard time because he's been obsessed with constantly putting out there. Hi, Michael. Hope you're watching this one. Nonsense about Caitlin Clark and strength training and bulking up, and it's all completely wrong. This is what I mean when I say I think Caitlin Clark adding a lot of muscle so quickly, not a lot, not quickly, may have impacted her mechanics, thus leading to so many soft tissue injuries, just like bodybuilders walk differently. My Lord, have you seen? Anyway, although that is a pretty drastic example, yes, it is, and it does not make a point. Now, first of all, this picture, by the way, which is absolutely wild, if you look at the first of all, she's flexing. And for those who don't know, it's hard to tell, but you can see it's just perfect. Her right arm a little bit forward of her left. So if actually at a glance, unless you're really paying attention, it makes her left arm look bigger than it is because it's her right arm is kind of adding to it a little bit, but it is absolutely not strength training. Here's AI overview. Yes, adding too much muscle can potentially hurt walking mechanics, particularly if it leads to muscle imbalances or restricts movement. No. But anyway, let's dig in. We're going to talk about this. We are going to go into the weeds. So buckle up if you are interested in this. Hope you are, because this one might be long. I'm just saying. So strength training. Okay, first of all, just in general, strength is everything. It makes everything easier. Talk about using the oh my gosh, I'm sorry for the I was swallowing. Now you're all like, dude, you're like Stephanie White. It takes strength. This is an extreme example, but I'm just, like Michael said, I'm making the point. It takes strength to blink your eyes, folks. You know how older people they struggle to get out of chairs? You know what I'm talking about? You've seen it? Yeah. Well, look, we all decline to a certain point eventually, right? But that point could be extended a long, long way if older people strength train. Because why are they struggling to get out of that chair? Because as we age, starting as early as 25 years old, unless we're actually strength training, we lose muscle mass and strength. Guess what? That makes it more difficult to get out of a chair because what is getting out of a chair? It's basically squatting. The less muscle and strength you have, the more difficult it is going to be to squat. Now, the bulking up. Bulking up. Okay, do you know what bulking up is? Because I've done it. Still, by the way, didn't have movement mechanic issues and things like that. Doesn't cause injury, but bulking up is not 5 to 8 pounds over any time frame. I've put on that much in a few days, but it is not 5 to 8 pounds over any time frame. Bulking up is more like 30 or 40 pounds over 10 to 15 weeks. And usually, unless you're like the 1% of the 1% in terms of your genetics, when you're truly bulking up, you're adding on a lot of pounds, a lot of weight. You're also adding on some fat that then, speaking of bodybuilders, you then try and take that off at a little slower pace and leave the muscle. But 5 to 8 pounds for anybody is, you all probably wouldn't even have noticed Caitlin Clark having a little extra weight. She is 6 feet tall, by the way. 5 to 8 pounds on a 6 foot frame is absolutely nothing. I can tell you that as well because I'm about just a touch over 6 feet. I'm basically Caitlin Clark's height. And that is nothing, especially she went from like what, 150 to 160 or 152 to 160 or something like that. That is absolutely nothing. But this is this type of stuff that's gone way, way back. Back in like the 50s and 60s, strength training was a no-no for athletes because we didn't understand any of it. And then you had this guy, Bill Starr, who sort of revolutionized strength training and connected it to athletic performance. And I think one of his first big stories was, I can't remember the guy's name, but it was a linebacker. I believe it was a linebacker for the Indianapolis Colts. And he had the guy put on like 60 pounds of muscle in the offseason. Now, of course, Caitlin Clark wouldn't want to do that, but I'm making a point in that his performance improved. He got faster even with the added muscle because of how much stronger he got. Some of the strongest athletes in the world, obviously Olympic weightlifters and then sprinters, elite level sprinters, the amount of muscle, the amount of weight they squat is insane. Most are 2.5 times body weight. Some are even 3 times body weight, which is something else I want to get into in a minute, which is also really, really important. Now, a lot of people talk about tightness and being muscle bound and all that, and there's no such thing, and we'll talk about that a little further down, but that's important. I know a lot of people look at bodybuilders and they think they're all tight and everything because of those bulging muscles. So, myth: strength training is dangerous and makes you slow. That is another one I keep hearing, that the bulking up and the strength training has made her slow, when strength training actually does the opposite. The fact is, strength training, when done correctly, is incredibly safe, and it makes you a better, faster, more explosive athlete. It is the ultimate key to athleticism. It is the ultimate key to speed. It is the very foundation of all athleticism. And yes, proper strength training helps prevent injuries. A nice woman I know, I mean, I'm not going to be like, oh, we're great friends, but I know her, professional colleagues. I've exchanged emails with her and stuff. Actually has a program for specific athletes based on injury prevention for ACL injuries, such as skiers, because that's a big one with skiers, and is all centered around the right movements within a strength training program. Okay. It's the very foundation of athleticism. As I mentioned, yes, there are other factors, but all else being equal, a stronger athlete is a better athlete. Now, another thing that's important to understand is that strength training and muscle building are related, but it is not an exact one-to-one relation. There are things that you tweak in terms of your intensity levels, your rest intervals, your volume, and so forth in your training that differ between pure strength training and muscle building. Because yes, you can build a lot of strength without really adding muscle. Just look at power lifters. They are in weight classes. Now, obviously, if you're the top weight class where it's, above and go as far as you want, you're not worried too much about that. But, and it's also obviously happens for athletes that have weight classes like wrestlers and MMA fighters and so forth, that also need to get stronger, but they're staying within a weight class. Okay. Now, I want to talk about, because this is so important to the W. You've heard me talk about this a lot, how very few WNBA players have a vertical. And that's why you still see a lot of the type of basketball you would expect to see, because they're not very athletic. The WNBA, and I think it's changing, right? With Caitlin Clark, some of the other players, and some of the players coming up behind them in college, which I love. I think that we're slowly going to get that change. But the WNBA has evolved from where it was. It was always about, in the women's game, just being a big body and having just enough skill. But it was basically, as long as you were a big physical body, you were going to excel at the women's game when it comes to basketball. But you look at those athletes, none of them have a vertical. Right. Angel Reese can't get off the ground. Aaliyah Boston can't get off the ground. Now you've got some players that can. And what do you notice about them? They're quicker. They're more explosive. They're more what we would say athletic, right? Caitlin Clark can take 2 step, go off 2 feet and get the rim. She actually I don't know what her vertical is, but she's got a nice vertical because again, she's 6 feet tall. And that vertical leap is the number one, again, just like I was saying about these, strength training and so forth. Vertical leap is the number one indicator of athleticism. It's not the be all end all, but if you had to say pick one thing, most people in the know when it comes to improving athletic performance, working with athletes, it's going to be the vertical leap. This one young lady I work with, who, by the way, went through two separate ACL injuries before I was working with her, one with her left, one with her right. She was a college keeper, soccer. And oh my gosh, I did it again. Sorry. Anyway, I worked with her. She was an online trainer. She was out of school in Iowa, and her vertical jump in 12 weeks went from 10.5 inches to 19.25 inches. She said, I've been using, where is it? I'm working with coach online using his one-on-one trading. I've already made incredible strides in my strength and power. Now I'm quicker, more explosive, and getting to balls I didn't get to in the past. I can't recommend working with coach enough. And that's again, she's a keeper. So now that vertical leap, that force production into the ground, which is what makes you fast, what makes you quick, and that comes from strength. She had more of that. So she's more explosive. She's quicker off the line as a keeper to make saves. She gets further both vertically and left and right when she's diving for plays. Another young lady that I work with said, I had a meeting with my college coach before winter break because I wanted to find out what I could do to make a bigger impact. He told me I needed to get stronger. I'm pretty small and had a tendency to get knocked off the ball by bigger players, and he wanted me to get faster and more explosive over 10 to 15 yards. That's the key in soccer, just so you know, that acceleration, not so much how fast you are over 60 or 70. My dad, also a coach, recommended that I work with you over the break. In just 7 weeks, she said, Coach helped me accomplish my goals. I'm faster to the ball and much stronger in my core, so I win more 50-50 chances and I don't get knocked off the ball nearly as much as I had before. Because of the program, my confidence has skyrocketed, and so has my coach's confidence, her college soccer coach. As a result, my playing time has increased dramatically. I highly recommend working with coach. So I just wanted to give you an idea. Again, examples of players who work to get stronger and now their athleticism has improved and their sports performance has improved. So I mentioned force production, so I want to talk about that real quick. Force production is basically how much force you can put into the ground. The more force you can put into the ground, the higher your vertical, but also the faster you are, because vertical force production comes into play a lot when running forward, right? It's that explosive first step. The more force you can put into the ground with that first step, the quicker you are going to be. And this comes from your strength training. And then, of course, a byproduct of that, which is power. And as an athlete, you need to develop more power. In order to do that, you simply need to get stronger. A good athletic performance program focuses on strength training at its core, and it adds on other components that create a stronger, faster, quicker, explosive, more injury resistant athlete. Okay. Increased strength means increased power, increased speed, which gives you a quicker change of direction, which assists in the improvement of agility. Real quick, for those who don't know, we talk a lot about agility, but most people, when they talk about agility or training agility, they're really talking about change of direction. Okay. Change of direction is simply you run and you go left or you go right. That is change of direction. You're doing it on your own and you know where you are going ahead of time. Agility is change of direction with that reactive component. So, for example, as a defender in basketball, you're guarding the ball. They're bringing it up court. You don't know if they're going to go left. You don't know if they're going to go right. And you respond to that. Your change of direction responds to that. But in that case, with the reactive component to it, you are talking about agility. And they are not the same thing. They are obviously similar, but they are not the exact same thing. So anyway, let's roll back into this. This is getting long. I told you, I hope people watch this. Core principles of strength training, okay? There's 8 that I usually talk about that are keys to strength gains for improving your athleticism, your form, of course, in your exercise. Progressive overload. You're adding weight over time. The volume of the training, the intensity of the training, the recovery factor, in terms of rest outside of the training in the gym, but also So we're talking about like between sessions, but also between sets. And that's where I get into things like strength and muscle being related, but not the same. Usually, if your focus is on a lot of muscle, your rest between sets in of exercise is going to be much shorter than the strength training rest between sets. Of course, the frequency, how often you're training, your exercise selection as well. There are better exercises and not so good exercises. And you can add nutrition to that as well. And then the big thing, and this is why it's not even about why it's I talk about strength training, not so much muscle building, although there are athletes that need muscle, and you kind of balance what an athlete needs between the two. But in order to become a better athlete, to do these things we're talking about, where you want to get quicker and more explosive and get faster, we're talking about building relative strength versus absolute strength. Relative strength is the key, and that's what we want to build. So, what is that? That is the strength you're building relative to your body weight. For example, a 250-pound man who squats 250-pound man squats 250 pounds, and that's his absolute strength. And then you have someone else who squats 250 pounds, but they only weigh 160. Their relative strength is much, much higher. So again, other things being equal, because obviously there are genetic factors in there between the two people, an athlete with a higher relative strength is going to be a quicker, faster, more explosive athlete. Does that make sense? It's also important to understand, because I know you see it with hardcore and bodybuilders, and you watch like if you watch like old clips or something like pumping iron with Arnold. Proper strength training is not about busting a gut and having blood vessels popping out of your forehead. Okay. It is not that kind of training that we're talking about. In fact, a good strength training program for a athlete, they should actually feel relatively refreshed after the session. It is not a conditioning session. It is not a muscle bomb and blitz session. Okay. It is not that type of training. And so you've got things like 5x5 training or 10x1, which I love as well, where you're doing 10 sets of an exercise with one single rep per set. But it's not a max. People get worried about that. You're resting maybe 2 to 4 minutes between sets. So yeah, it takes a long time, but you might only do two exercises in that session. And that final rep should be tough, but it's not a two failure rep. You shouldn't fail on that rep. And as you get more experience, you figure it out. Maybe, like after the seventh of those 10, you're like, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to get this eighth one. So you reduce the weight a little bit, or you stop there for the day and you build up. When you can get 10 individual singles and that last one is not an absolute max, you add a little weight the next time, that sort of thing. I won't go into it too much. You're probably already bored and have checked out. But anyway, I'm going to keep going. And then for that power, that's when you get into plyometric exercises, explosive stuff. You're going to see some in this videos. I'm just putting up exercises so you all not get bored, and you can see the type of stuff that I use with my athletes when I'm training them. You'll see things like bounds and single leg bounds and broad jumps and multiple broad jumps and just doing tuck jumps and exercises like that. And that is the type of stuff that you need. You don't need these this crazy nonsense you might see on Instagram for trainers to get followers and things like that. That's social media is really, really bad in that respect, because that's the type of stuff that catches people's eyes and goes viral, but it is not necessary. It can get you hurt, and it doesn't add any value to your training program. So now this whole nonsense about strength training and bulking up making you slower or tighter, not true. I mean, first of all, go look at the Eagles' offensive line play football, man. But setting that aside, look at some guys. Let's go back to like Bruce Lee, or go back to Jean-Claude Van Damme. I mean, that was a man who don't say every movie he would throw in a like a split, sometimes even on, say, chairs or something, because of the added strength that it adds to it. And he was a big dude. He was a muscular dude. Or another great example is look at a lot of UFC fighters. Look at like one of the best of all time, Jean St. Pierre, GSP, absolutely phenomenal. The dude was like 5'10", 5'11", 205 pounds, completely ripped, like muscles on muscles, and as flexible, as mobile, as quick, as explosive as any athlete in the world. But they're not training to be power lifters. if you think these MMA guys that I'm talking about are some of the quickest, most explosive, most mobile, most flexible athletes in the world, they also have to have stability in that motion, which is why they have the strength so they don't get injured. I do not know what else to tell you. So to think that Caitlin Clark adding 5 or 6 pounds of muscle made her slow is absolutely absurd. Why is Michael Jordan on this cover? Because Michael Jordan was famous for adding muscle in his basketball career, for bulking up. Yes, he didn't really bulk up, but he definitely added muscle. And he became obsessed with lifting weights. There were times when Michael Jordan would actually lift weights before games, which is absolutely crazy. And that's to the point I want to talk about the tightness and stuff. A lot of that is, if any of you have ever lifted and you've lifted, especially with lighter weights, but you've lifted for like high reps and you get that burn and everything, and maybe you get yourself this really great pump and you feel tight, right? You feel like you can't move really well. That's temporary. That's all the blood rushing to the area and the nutrients and everything and so forth because of the exercise you're doing. But that is not how you actually are from day to day. Other thing I want to talk about, because this is important for injury prevention, and that is deceleration. So these are the types of things that need to be trained within the program, and that's where you get some of the plyo stuff and some of the movement stuff that you'll see. Is most non-contact injuries for athletes occur when they're decelerating, right? When they need to stop and change direction, not when they are accelerating. It's a very different movement, and it is something that, yes, you should be working with athletes to change. It's when most non-contact injuries occur. So specific exercises to work on deceleration mechanics is very, very important. And to that point, because this is also very important that we'll get into. I remember one time training, I think it was a U12 or U13 soccer team. They were 11 and 12, and we're out in the summer, and we were introducing them to stuff and doing, body weight stuff, and even just body weight movement things like bear crawls or crab crawls and things like that. These are girls that were playing soccer at a relatively high level for their age and where they were, good athletes otherwise, that you would think. Not a single one could squat. Not a single one could do a body weight squat properly. Not a single one, for those of you that are older and actually played outside would know this, not a single one of them could sit in the body weight squat position where your butt isn't on the ground, but you're all the way down. None of them could do with it. Why? Kids don't play anymore. They're not outside playing anymore. They're not moving. They're not running around, climbing trees and all that. So part of this issue in terms of adapting it to our training is this whole modern society nonsense. And so you get movements that we have to talk about, like maybe the two of the most important that you have to train properly is the squat and also the hip hinge, where you're going to get something like a kettlebell swing, because one of the most important muscles, and this could be a problem with Caitlin Clark, and again, I'm guessing, and that is your hip flexors, right? That is your psoas muscle, which is the only muscle in the body that connects the upper body to the lower body. And if your hip flexors are tight, if your hip flexors are weak, that can cause injury problems all over the body. You can actually get knee problems, knee injuries that you feel because of weak, tight hip flexors. It's something that nobody thinks about, and is a problem in modern society because of all of the sitting that we do. Okay. Look, we all know injuries are absolutely awful, but there are things that we can do with our strength training and the exercises that we pick in order to fix that. And hip hinges, which is a kettlebell swing, or you also see in a Romanian deadlift, which you're probably seeing in this video. Really, really important for athletes to be doing those exercises properly. We also have, again, the squats. And then, but I do want to get into this because this is also really important for those of you still with me. Bad training is all over the place. Think about how many athletes are out there now, how many sports teams and all these different sports with college and youth sports and all that. It's impossible to have enough good qualified trainers working with all these athletes. And so a lot of them, they take exercise training programs that they see online or what have you, and they give it to their teams. They have no real understanding of what it does or why it needs to be done in a certain way. And so, yes, core training programs can be a problem for athletes. All those core principles I mentioned, like frequency, volume, intensity, form, exercise selection, recovery, all that. If those aren't put together properly, yes, you absolutely can have a problem. So you could say, and I've talked about this last year for those of you that have been around a while and remember where they showed clips at times of the fever in the gym. And I said it hurt my heart to see because I didn't like any of what I was seeing. So yeah, that can be a problem, but that is different from all the stuff I'm saying about strength training being the problem or bulking up being the problem because it is not like that. Now, obviously, genetics also play a role into that. And look, Caitlin, after the first injury, the other injuries could have come from Caitlin overcompensating in terms of her movement. So it's not necessarily bad movement mechanics because of bulking up, because that's just simply not true with the little bit of muscle she added. But that first injury could have her moving in a different way that she may not even realize that. And then that eventually has other body parts breaking down as well. I remember Sophie one time talked about the length and intensity of their practices. So again, if it's not handled properly, the strength training and say plyometrics and the team sport and all of that, if it's not handled properly, you get overtraining, and over time, overtraining does nothing but lead to injuries because the body can't overcompensate and repair itself and get better, and eventually it breaks down. But man, 4 leg injuries in 2.5 months after roughly 180 plus straight games of no injury going back to high school is a concern for sure, but it is not because Caitlin Clark got stronger. It is not because Caitlin Clark added a few pounds of muscle to her body. Those are things that would help her. Again, if the training is bad training, that is different, but it absolutely is not strength training. All athletes should strength train. I start training athletes with strength training when they're in middle school. And I know people scream about that, but again, I will say that is another one of those myths that's out there that just has not been broken in the general public's consciousness yet. But think about, again, if you're older, think about what you did as a kid. If you were one of those, you were out, you were running around, you were playing tag, you were climbing trees, you were jumping, you were sitting in the squat position, you're doing strength training. You're not doing, design strength training for a specific result, but you are strength training. If you were doing, I'm trying to think like a jungle gym at a park or something, and you're doing, well, what are they called? Monkey bars, and you're going from side to side. That takes strength, folks. And some of you might even done pull-ups on them. A great strength training exercise that's body weight only, so you can start at younger ages and do. There are You'd be surprised at the number of body weight exercises that you can do that even if you're relatively strong in terms of weights, you're going to struggle with body weight exercises. Body weight exercises are fantastic exercises as well, even for strength training. How many pull-ups can you all do? Come on, be honest. It is but anyway, I could go on and on. I know I probably rattled through some of that really fast, but otherwise I could have made this like a 4-hour seminar because again, sort of a thing that I do. So I want to leave it there. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. For any of you that are still here, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel. I really do appreciate it. Go have a fantastic day, especially if you did listen to all this. You deserve a nap or a nice drink or something like that. And I will talk to you later.